Hello there, people from Totally Rad Music. I hope all is well. This is going to be my video of like the recorded interview. And firstly, I'll just give like an introduction to myself and what I do. My name is Charlie Moss. I'm a kind of session guitarist, multi-instrumentalist. I play a lot of bass and mainly guitar on sessions. I have a decent level of knowledge on piano too. I play a lot of electric piano and records with my bands, doing kind of like jazz-esque piano stuff. I write a lot on piano too, so a lot of my songwriting comes out of piano. But yeah, guitar's my main instrument, is what I started on. And I'll talk a little bit about my musical background. I kind of grew up listening to kind of like funk and soul, a lot of 70s music that I got from my grandma, a lot of folk too, like Simon and Garfunkel, ABBA, some of my favourite artists, like from the late 70s. And I was always wanting to play instruments from being about 6 or 7 years old. From being about 7, I picked up violin in school, and I played violin until I was, I think, about 12 years old. So I played for 5 years. I got to a grade 5, but I really didn't enjoy the classical kind of teaching approach of it. And I kind of wanted to stray away from it the more my musical taste developed. So after doing violin for 5 years, I kind of quit it, and then I got a lot of into musical theatre and acting, which was awesome because it allowed me to it was like massively pushing me out of my comfort zone. I would do a lot of singing, which was great, like all live on stage at the Hackney Theatre in Hackney Wick, and that was amazing. And basically, over lockdown, I hadn't played anything in like an instrument in quite a few years since violin, and I was about 16. And I was like, okay, maybe I started getting into alternative rock and classic rock, like 70s stuff, like Pink Floyd, Jimi Hendrix. So I was like, I used to say, oh, I don't play guitar. Oh, I don't want to. Like, everyone plays guitar. And then in lockdown for my birthday, I got bought a guitar and a little tiny orange amp about this big. And I basically spent the entire year from like May in the first year of lockdown until probably next May just playing like 5-6 hours every day, learning songs. But obviously I couldn't get a teacher because I was at home. So my approach to learning was basically just learn songs and then understand what techniques were used in those songs, and kind of understand the genre background and the stylistic techniques they use, and then kind of try and learn that and understand what it is, theoretically wise too. So that could even be like, if I was learning a funk song, it might be like using extended chords like ninths, sevenths, and it's using that kind of very muted strumming in the left and right hands. I learned those techniques just by learning Chic songs, any Nile Rodgers kind of funk. And because of that, I kind of just developed learning all the music I love, which at this point was like rock, reggae, funk, jazz, soul, all this stuff. After learning that, I kind of just developed my own kind of playing style, and only really, it's been, well, now it'll be my 5th year of playing, but in this year I've kind of really found my feet and know what I want to play, know what I want to write. But I also, in hand with that, now do a lot of session gigs. I do a lot of arranging where I work with some pop artists and people from my university, ICMP. I work with them to, if for example, if their stuff is very heavy production and it's very all made on Logic or software instruments, then I'll kind of work with them to arrange their music for a live environment and chart for drums, bass, guitar, a little bit of piano. I'm quite struggle with charting vocals, but usually I can work with the vocalist with that. And I do a lot of that, so I kind of rearrange it in a cool live environment way, which is something I really like doing. I also do some musical directing on the side, which is awesome. I love working with bands on a talkback mic and talking them through their set, helping them out with anything they need. What else do? I do a lot of acoustic songwriting too, with a few of my friends who like kind of play. I love folk stuff. One of my biggest influences is like Damien Rice, Simon and Garfunkel. So and Bob Dylan. I love all that kind of fingerpicky stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of where I'm at with. Alright, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my teaching experience and my teaching philosophies. My teaching experience, I've taught about 5 students, and overall, most of them have been at a beginner to intermediate level. Some of them have been kind of, one of my students, Ethan, he's 21, and I've kind of done a range of between around 15 and 23, I think my oldest student was. And my friend Ethan, who was my first student, he basically said to me, he was like, look, I'm decent at fingerstyle. I really want to learn like more fingerstyle guitar. And I also want to know theory because I don't know what anything means. So I kind of started him off with, I first of all kind of I wanted to see what his mindset towards the instrument was and actually playing, because that's very important to me. If the student is if it's difficult to see if they're kind of putting the time into it and they actually care, then it changes the approach for me a little bit. I have also had students where they're not particularly interested. My youngest student, who was 15, his mum kind of wanted him to play, and he kind of used to show up to the lessons each week, and he wouldn't kind of learn everything that was asked of him. But it went on for quite a while. For like 3 or 4 weeks, he hadn't learned like any of the chords I showed him or anything, and it was just like G major kind of D stuff. And I was like, okay, that's fine. So I was like, I need to find a way to adapt to kind of figure out how I can get this guy interested in it. So I said, what kind of music do you like? And he was like, oh, I kind of like Green Day. I like a lot of punk rock, like 90s stuff. Like he liked pop punk. I was like, okay, cool. So let's change this up a bit instead. I'll stop with my curriculum for a bit, and we'll start looking at just some basic chords, just so it can get you inspired a little bit, because he looked very uninspired every week. He would come in like it was a drag, and I didn't want it to feel like that. I wanted it to be fun. So I said, I was like, okay, cool, let's learn some power chords. So I kind of just showed him the basic D power chord, E, B. So then I could kind of show him some sort of progression. And also kind of worked on his right hand technique for that kind of genre. I showed him like the kind of down picking they do in that genre. And then I showed him these chords, and I was like, okay, now let's link this to some theory. So we're in the key of D. Let's look at the chords that are in the key. Let's see what you can play over it. And then I kind of went through each chord, and then he kind of started to grasp it a little bit more. And he kind of kept him interested, knowing that he could apply that to his favorite music, which I think was a cool approach for me of something that I was like, especially someone so young, and his brain was kind of all over the place. And I think he had some learning difficulties. I think it was interesting for me, and quite fun, to be honest, to be able to figure out how to adapt to his brain and how, he works. And then now I still teach him, and he's doing awesome. It's been about 8 months. he's a great student now, and he's started to get into a lot more like classic rock stuff, which I love. So I've been teaching him like Guns N' Roses, Pink Floyd stuff, and he's also finally getting on to like a little bit of modal stuff, modal knowledge, and his technique is getting a lot better. He practices every week, which I think something he definitely didn't have before, because I think he was sort of forced into it at first, but I'm really glad that he stayed interested in it. So my philosophy is always to be adaptive, and adapt to the student's personality, their learning difficulties if they have any, and just to be patient and understanding of what they want out of it. And yeah, I think I like to be as versatile as possible. Sometimes I start a lesson talking about, maybe let's say I'm talking about like right hand rhythms. There was a student of mine who wanted to learn some kind of like bossa nova and samba-esque stuff. So I said to him, I was like, okay, let's look at Garocha de Ipanema. And he said, okay, cool, a girl from Ipanema. And then he kind of wanted to work on the, because he kind of got the chords, like he understood what they were, but he couldn't get the right hand. He couldn't get that down, so I kind of spent a bit of time showing him that, and then I showed him, if he wants to develop the technique more, then songs that he can kind of push him out of his comfort zone, and how he could kind of stretch that sort of teaching, stretch that kind of technique to what it is. And I showed him a song called Isaura by Joao Gilberto, and which has got like a very fast samba rhythm in the right hand. And he kind of practiced it, and I told him always start off slow to a metronome, and he kind of started off about 60 BPM and then kind of upped it by 10 every however much he was practicing, every 10 to 15 minutes, or I think sometimes he would do each day, he would up the metronome by like 20. So then by the time he would come next, like every week, he was learning awesome stuff from all sorts of different genres and international music he really likes. But yeah, I like to think that I have a really good versatile approach to that sort of playing, like in terms of genres as well. I like to play everything, and I have played quite a lot of genres on gigs for all sorts of different artists. I played reggae, bossa nova, jazz, quite a wide range of stuff, I would say. But yeah, so that's kind of my approach to teaching at the moment, and I would say it's been quite beneficial. Every week I come in with new material and new either chord charts, sheet music, or it could just be chord sheets or scales, anything, and we kind of take a look at it in a musical way. My approach, I would say, is very much more musical rather than play the scale over and over again. Although there is a certain aspect to that, I like to say, how can you use this? That's important to me, you know. But yeah, and now I'm going to move on to my like additional skills and qualifications I've done. So obviously I'm a musician first, but I do a bit of studio engineering too on the side. I do a lot of assistant engineering in Tile Yard in King's Cross, which is a studio in Coal Drops Yard, kind of near there, and it basically is like quite a professional standard studio, and I get to work kind of in the studio throughout the day, helping them set up sessions, drums, kits, etc. That's really fun. The hours are very long, but it's really rewarding. I've got to work with some amazing artists like Rita Ora, Sigala, setting up for them, which is awesome. I really enjoyed that. And then what other stuff I do? I do a lot of arranging and charting, like I mentioned earlier. I would say at the moment I finished my first year at ICMP, Institute for Contemporary Music Performance, and I finished with the first, which I'm really happy about. And my reading is at a pretty good standard, I would say now. Even though I've only been reading for about a year and a half, like sheet music, like standard notation, I have massively learnt a lot and I've improved, and I'm probably reading at like a grade 5 or 6 level now. But my actual playing is probably at a good grade 7 to approaching grade 8, I would like to say, although I am still very early on in my degree. But yeah, I've definitely improved a lot in the last year too, and I'm still learning myself. One thing I always say to my students is always stay a student, because it's very important. You don't want to get to the age of 30 and you feel like you don't need to learn anything, because there is always more you can learn and you can always improve, you know. And yeah, that's kind of everything we're teaching at the moment, I've been doing. I'm going to move on now to my demonstration. And yeah, thank you. Hi there, so I'm back now and we're going to be I'm going to be doing a teaching demonstration, and we're going to be looking at extended chords, specifically 7th and 9th extended chords, and we're going to be in the key of E minor, so I'm going to be showcasing in the key of E minor, and this is kind of an approach for a beginner to intermediate, someone who already knows your kind of basic major and minor chords in the open positions. So for example, realistically they should know your A, B, C, D, E, F and G, and then maybe like some E minor and A minor and stuff, or even a D minor, anything like that. But I'm going to basically be covering how you play an E minor 7 and an E minor 9 in its open position, and what they mean, what they are. So we're going to start with an E minor 7, which you can play in 2 ways in the open position. You can play literally open with just one finger, with just one finger, your index finger, on the 2nd fret of the A string, and then every other string open. You can also play with your pinky finger on the 3rd fret of the B string, with that D in there, and then you basically play the same thing with just your index finger on the 2nd fret of the A. It kind of gives it that more open, airy sounds, which is also really nice. And if you want, because you already have that D on the 3rd fret of the B, you could also play a standard E minor with 2 fingers, with your 2nd fret on the D string, and just add your D note on the B after, so then you've got a full E minor with a 7th on the bottom, which is a very kind of way to play it, which is really cool. But what does this mean? Why does it sound like this? So the way I like to think of it is you have your E minor scale. That's kind of how it sounds, the E minor scale. And basically, if we count throughout the scale, so your notes in order, so you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And what note is that? That's a D, which we're playing here on the 3rd fret of the B string. So what that basically means is you're playing an E minor chord, but you're playing it with a D inside it, basically. Rather than, in this case, of if you're playing in its 4th position, inversion, you would be basically substituting your E note for your D note. Instead, you'd be having that D in there. And that's basically your E minor 7. And its minor 7 chords are usually used in a lot of soul songs, and it kind of gives it that like kind of chilled, laid back vibe. Rather than E minor, which is feels a lot darker and less open. It's got that lovely clarity with the minor 7 chord. And so that's the first one we're going to be doing, we're looking at. And now we're going to look at a E minor 9. All the chord positions should be on the screen just next to me here. This E minor 9, which we're going to be playing in the root position, is just here. So it's a very similar premise to the E minor 7, but it's going to sound like this. So this is a similar premise. If we count from our starting root note at E, and we're going to count to 9, but what this is going to, I'll explain when we get to it. So if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then we're kind of, that's the whole scale, right? So then what we're going to do is we're going to keep going, but now we're at the root again, the E. We're just going to do 1, so we're at the 1, the root, and then we're going to go to the 2. But the 2 is also the 9 of the scale if we start on our original E. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. But that would be a little different, which is something I could get onto later. The E minor 9, however, is your 9th note of the E minor scale, which is also the same as your 2nd. But you're having that on top again, as we did with the E minor 7. So you're basically having the note F sharp on the bottom string, but you're having an open E minor with that. So it's basically an E minor with your ring finger on the 2nd fret of the high E string. This kind of gives it a very similar kind of clarity, but in a very different, like ethereal way. So that's your root positions of how to play it. And if you kind of combine them, you can do very cool things with them. So that's kind of your open position E minor and E minor 9s. Use them in chord progressions however you like. I think it's really fun to sometimes start on an E minor and then have your E minor 7 there too. So you could like alternate between them, or you can have them as they are as an E minor 9. But now I'm going to move on to kind of an intermediate way to look at it, and I'm going to look at a few different inversions of them. So your E minor 7, you can actually play in a lot of ways. My favourite ways to play them are as follows. So yeah, I like playing it like. I also really like this one. I like this one, and a really nice it's just a 4-fingered one there. But I'm kind of going to look at these positions and how you can use them with any chord, basically. So if you're kind of proficient enough in your basic chords and you can do some bar chords, like maybe B minor, just like that kind of movement around the fretboard, then you're probably good to learn some of this stuff. So obviously you now know your root positions of the E minor 7. So now we're going to look at the 4th position, which is your kind of famous B minor position, kind of E minor, which we're going to just play a standard E minor first, which looks a little bit like this. But then now if we're going to play an E minor 7, what we're going to do is we're barring the 7th fret. We're going to remove our pinky finger on the G string, and we're going to have that open. So we're basically playing the 7th fret of the G and then the standard E minor position there. That's one of my favourite ways to play it. You can also play it in this kind of way, which I use for funk a lot, which I'll get to in a second. We have your kind of, I'll kind of walk through it actually. We've got your middle finger on the 7th of the A string. You've got your index finger on your 5th fret of the D string. You've got your 7th fret of the G string with your ring finger. So now you've kind of got this triad, this minor triad. And then you're going to add your pinky finger on the 8th fret of the B string. And for funk, I like to use this, but I like to remove I just kind of mute the D string. So I basically play everything but the 5th fret of the D. So then I kind of play like that, which you can add some really cool stuff to, because you can go. That's kind of why it's used in funk a lot. You hear that sound a lot. So that's a really cool inversion of it, and those are my two favourites, and that's the ones I'll only show you for now. Now I'm going to move on to E minor 9, and my two favourite inversions of it. So we have, for your E minor 9, you have this position, which is your 3rd position, and you also have this one, which is actually the same as the one I previously showed you earlier, but just up an octave. And there's a reason I show this position in particular, because it has a lot of versatility in terms of what you can do around it. And so we kind of have this one, which I'm going to show you now, which is your root is the E on the 7th fret of the A, and then you have your index finger on the 5th fret of the D, and then you have your ring finger on the 7th fret of the G, which is the kind of triad I showed you earlier on the other chord. But instead of having that G note there, we're going to basically pull it back, and we're going to have that F sharp on the bottom instead, which is your 9th or 2nd note of the scale. So then you basically have this lovely open kind of minor 9. I love that sound, it's so nice. And then I'm going to show you the final position, which is, for me, one of my favourites, which is your kind of lovely open, which is literally, I don't tend to play the root, because if I play with a bass player, they'll usually be playing with the root too. Or mainly, if you will. You have your E minor 7, which is, if you think about it, basically just the bottom 4 strings open. But in the 12th fret, if you just bar the 12th fret at the bottom and the bottom 4 strings, that's an E minor 7 right there, which I love because it's kind of funky. That's your E minor 7. And if you want to add the 9th, you basically just add that 2nd note, that F sharp, which we played earlier here on the 2nd fret of the E. We're basically going to play it on the 14th fret of the E string. So for example, if you're vamping over some chords or you're jamming, you can kind of include that little, or you can also include that lovely hammer on to the 14th fret of the E. And then I kind of usually utilize this position with, I kind of get the major pentatonic and I kind of do some hammer-ons and pull-offs up. This is just an idea again, but I love using there's some really lovely sounds to be had there. But yeah, so that's my kind of interpretation of how I look at minor 7 and minor 9 chords. There's plenty more inversions you can play all over the fretboard. For E minor alone, you have which I kind of go over in my cage system of how I look at chords. The cage system is very important. It's a whole nother technique, but this is the way I like to look at it. So yeah, thank you very much. Alright, so I'm going to wrap up this video by talking about how I sort of plan lessons. And my my goals, I always have a learning objective for each lesson. It could be a technique. So for example, if we were doing extended chords, like I said, I say my learning objective for the student would be understand extended chords and how they can be utilized and used throughout the fretboard. And I will my plan for a lesson usually starts with some warm-up activities. It could be some arpeggio warm-ups, like something like that, to a metronome maybe, was warm up to. I also do, if it's someone who plays a lot of rhythm guitar, then we'll kind of run through some chord progressions in different inversions throughout the fretboard, so then they feel a little bit warmed up if they're going. Some stuff like that, and I'll have them play. Sometimes I'll ask them to play a chord progression and play it in different positions throughout the neck, in completely different inversions. Is a really good way to warm up too, and kind of get the brain moving. The main content is usually based around a theoretical idea with links to a musical song or examples of music. And my closing exercises are usually what I would like them to practice by the next week. So if it's, again, let's say extended chords, I would ask them to kind of look through the major scale and kind of work out and maybe have a research, and I'll give them some resources of different extended chords they can play, how they can basically learn all of the extensions of different chords and what they mean in terms of in relation to the scale, which is something important to me. That's something I would give them at the end of the lesson, but it's usually quite effective. I find if the student practices and they come back the following week, they've I always like to have the approach be, okay, you can come to the lesson and every week I would like to teach you something new. I don't ideally want to have to go over something over and over again if I don't have to. Obviously, I'm willing to spend the time with the student to help them out at any time. But I think I always want to make sure that it's effective in terms of you now have another week to look over this and learn it. I want to make sure that you understand it before you leave, obviously. And in that case, maybe I'll take another lesson on it with them if it's something that they're struggling with particularly. But other than that, I kind of try to do one thing each week and move throughout a curriculum that I use. I use a lot of Berklee stuff if I'm looking at kind of jazz-based stuff or reading. That's what I use. I use a lot of Phil Capone stuff for scales, modes, arpeggios. So I have lots of resources that I use. I also use my own personal ones that I had at the start of the year. I made a lot of them myself, so I have a lot of scalic ones and everything, kind of modal stuff with all kinds of scales and ideas. But yeah, so that's sort of my learning approach, and it's been proven to be quite effective for my students. A lot of them have gone on to do their grades and done really well. Yeah, but overall, it's been a really exciting year in terms of teaching, and it's something I really love to do. It reminds me of being an early guitar player, and being self-taught myself is something that I've had a couple of teachers since. I was self-taught for 3 years, and after that I basically started having teachers. But a lot of my teachers have this very particular approach to teaching that I've had before, and a lot of the things I like to deduct. I think my first teacher I had really took the music out of it and made it kind of boring for me sometimes, even though I learned a lot from him and he was a brilliant guy. I found it a bit stale sometimes to be in the lessons, and that's something I really didn't want to give my students when I started out. My teacher now is fantastic. I love working with him. He teaches me this completely different stuff every week, pushes me out of my comfort zone, which to an extent is really what someone needs as a player. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you consider me for the application. And whoever's watching, I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you very much. Bye.